Do you like conversation on a variety of topics? Feel like no one wants to talk about the things that interest you? Tired of only hearing the same political, sports, or catastrophe talk? Yeah, we feel that way too. Join two high-functioning geeks as they discuss just about anything under the sun. We can't tell you what we'll be talking about each week because we don't know where our brains will take us. It will be an interesting conversation though, so hang on and join us. Here comes the Relentless Geekery. We didn't listen to our parents' wisdom and knowledge when we were young, and I see my kids and I'm telling them stuff and they're not listening. And I'm just like, oh my God, but
Yeah.
what are you going to do?
Actually, when I was young, I don't remember my parents, like they used to say, like, go out and get some sun. They weren't, this was back in the 60s when I was growing up. My first 10 years were 59 to 69. So I don't think there was much talk at all then of melanoma and I don't know, now that I'm aware and how it's like, wow, that's a sun tanning salon. Before you go on your Caribbean vacation, they tell you to go in there and get a base tan like I did before my honeymoon. And now you find out, well, that's even more intense UV rays and UVA and B. And I don't know, I like the fact that science marches on and discovers and shares and, you get more aware. But exactly what you just said, some people just have what they learned when they were 10 is how they are the rest of their life. You kind of can't disabuse them of the world gets smarter. It gets more knowledgeable.
Yeah.
It gets,
well, there's a lot of things. I mean, my father, we have a well, so we drink water from the ground. It goes through filters and all that. But his answer to getting rid of groundhogs that were eating his garden was to pour used motor oil into the groundhog hole. And after I thought about that when I was older, I'm like, wait a second, do you realize
that's our groundwater?
Yeah. I mean, no, but then he's like, well, I'm fine today, maybe not tomorrow. There's just no concept of that later in life thing sometimes.
Exactly. And unfortunately, like for instance, Lakewood has, I think we get city water that is from the city of Cleveland, but we do our own filtration of it so that when you read, you can go online to onelakewood.com and maybe org and see the water standards that they maintain. But that's very uncommon, I think. There's all kinds of communities like throughout the South where they've been dumping terrible things for a long time. There's Superfund sites next door to where people live, and they're not volunteering that this is death water and stuff like that, or
Flint,
that, like that, and especially when someone makes a big mistake where they actually had a choice to make as to, those pipes are 100 years old, right? That they're probably lead or asbestos in your walls or whatever else it might be. And they just kind of say, we'll try it and see what happens. It's like, wow, they've done studies that's really a bad idea, especially some things you can leave alone and they'll be okay. It's when you disturb them that now you have a hazmat site. We're doing any number of things to our house. And when you do anything with like duct work in your house, if you have a century home, you have to get it checked. Because like I said, if it just stays in place, it's fine. But otherwise, there could be asbestos in the flooring, asbestos in the duct work. And I don't want to be, hey, I survived melanoma and atrial fibrillation, and then mesothelioma got me. You know what I mean? I breathed in fibers,
So when Jason was a little bit younger, he is a little bit allergic to bees. Not to the point where he stops breathing, but he gets swollen and bad. And the one time we're talking to him, he's like, no, I don't want to go outside. We're like, why? I don't want mesothelioma. What are you talking about? He's like, I don't want to be afraid of bees. And we were all laughing so hard because it was just, all over the place.
Right. I'll tell you, this thought just occurred to me. One of the cool things when you're growing up for kids, people talk about why do kids have a fascination with dinosaurs? And it's not only that they're monsters and big, there's something cool to a kid about learning a jawbreaker word. When you first learned anti-establishmentarianism and all the dinosaur names are like that. But you know what I think has happened nowadays? Kids aren't learning dinosaurs. They're learning diseases. They're learning all that like that, exactly. Commercials have this thing that it's, seven syllables long and yet, and then when it breaks into the news that you have to hydrochloroquinone, I'm not sure if I even got that one right, but then it's like, well, that's different than hydrochlorobenzene. And that even the, telecasters are having to check their notes to make sure that they didn't miss a syllable, that they didn't mispronounce it. Remember when the, volcano went off in Iceland. And it's another one. It's like a 10-syllable guy. And at one point I said, I have to memorize this just so I can let it roll out of my mouth. And people go, oh, aren't you Icelandic? And yet sometimes in foreign
Because that's
languages,
what people say very commonly.
I know. But like, and this is kind of a humbling thing is I really have a problem with like remembering long Indian names. You know what I mean? When like I've had people that I've worked with that were really good friends, Prasad Kataragada and stuff like that. But once they start to get into that, it's again 7 syllables, or that the vowels and the consonants kind of don't go in the right places. I know this is just the most stupid Western thing to say, but
Right.
whenever you
But
like, whenever people say Chipotle instead of Chipotle because they've not accommodated the fact that there are other languages and that they do
right.
have different accents and different letter order and stuff,
We call
I
it
can see
Chipotle.
myself having it. So Chipotle then, see, exactly that. And if anything, it's kind of funny to have people when they have words like, well, I can see how that makes sense because that's like a word that you do know, but and people who read a lot, or the first time that they say a word that they've only read and they kind of like look around to see, did I get that right? Everybody's got, I know I think we might have talked about this before. I said communique at one point and someone said, oh, that's pronounced communique. It's like, what about unique? And
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
you fooled me. Gosh darn
There
it.
have been times poor Jason will be trying to tell us something and he's just saying it and on. And we're like, wait. You mean this? He goes, yeah, that. Like, oh my God, he was just saying it wrong. And I can't think of an example, but he does it like
Right.
all the time. So,
Yeah.
hey, go ahead.
No. I think there's even like a literary term for that, a word that you've
Literary
only
term
read and
for-
not ever pronounced. You know what I mean? So it's kind of
Yeah.
like that's meta revert, one step removed, but it happens so often that someone had to say, oh, that's a para poopadookadoo, or
Right.
whatever it is.
Like the first time you learn uvula.
Right. Yeah. Actually, I think, so there are certain words that it isn't only that you first heard it or read it, it's that you heard it like on a famous thing. So how do I know? I think it's uvula instead of uvula because I heard it on Saturday Night Live where it's like, oh, I must have foolishly glossed right over my uvula. And then forever, ever, that's in your head that way. Isn't that funny?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I've been reading about, let me tell you, my mind has been blown in the last week with working with JD and altering my writing and prose. So I've been reading some things more classroom stuff almost, talking about how we get words and what words are proper. And let me tell you, we know a couple of people that are grammar Nazis. And I'm reading this one book that says most of the time when people are saying, oh, that's not proper grammar, they're really saying it's not proper of the way that like the Chicago Manual of Style says you should use it. Doesn't mean it's
but the
not proper.
vernacular allows it. Exactly.
Yes.
That's not the way people talk. That's the way.
Exactly.
Okay. Yes.
And they say what grammar can change and grammar can be different for different people and different cultures in different parts of a country. So even though, you hear somebody say, I ask you that. And we're like, oh my God, but the thing is, if it starts picking up and more people do it in 100, 200, 300 years, that will be common and people will correct you if you don't use it that way. So everything we've got are rules set over hundreds of years that have just been agreed on. But there's no rules. There's no body that says you have to do this other than the Manual of Style, which isn't grammar. It's just the way we prefer to use that grammar.
Right. If you're going to be proper. Exactly. And honestly, I love, every year there's an article from like the New York Times or someplace like that, the OED, that says, here's the new words this year that have been adopted because we didn't have a use for it before. And here's also the ones whose meaning is transforming. So, that literally now is officially in the dictionary as both literally and figuratively.
Really?
Because people think of it as literature, not as it is real, it is true. And they don't distinguish between literally and figuratively. So now it's become, and what's the word for that? Where it has multiple meanings, including its opposite, like flammable or inflammable is both not flammable or flammable. You know what I mean? So like it's I love language enough that I love seeing those transformations, if you will, based on common usage, based on different cultures. I think I mentioned this before. A total shout out. There's a very cool series of books called Maledicta. An author that did research into vulgarity. And so he doesn't just, talk about here's shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits like George Carlin. He does the scholarly work of saying, this is like the first printed version of this. This is probably from the Old Norse, and then it got corrupted into this. This is, you know what I mean? Like, here's a famous person that we like to think that, famous people are all like proper in the way we just talked about proper English. But no, Benjamin Franklin was a Blue Street guy, and any number of other famous people. If you were in the military, you acquired a certain amount of profanity and vulgarity.
Man.
Like that. And that he's really good about differentiating between profanity and vulgarity and like where they come from. That this is, religious swearing is different than fecal swearing, is different than sexual swearing. And that like there's really cool curses that are particular to certain languages. So like when the English say bloody, it's really serious. It's really like us saying fucking, if you will, but it doesn't translate. We say it like to sound like Monty Python, to sound like quaint. And, and like, same thing, Montreal, where they say, tabernacle, it's really a serious swear there. Germans have it where if you compare someone to an animal, it's really serious. Whereas like when you hear Schweinhund, it's kind of like, oh, that's like Hogan's Heroes. That's a silly thing. No, it's to say someone is crazy or to say someone is like an animal, it's really a big insult in different languages. So I love reading about that. And I'm bear with me. I'm trying to think of, I want to give you the author's name because I so much respect him. At one point, I read somewhere that he had he had accumulated, there's probably 30 different editions of this, and he was selling them to get money to take care of paying off his house or something like that. So whatever volumes I was missing, that you couldn't even find on Amazon, I ordered from him. And we had a very nice exchange of emails back and forth about kind of my saying, man, you've done something that nobody else has done. It's very cool, scholarly work. I learned a lot. You know what I mean? When you find out that there are 2,000, whatever, thousands of different ways to tell someone to go to hell. I love swearing is one of those cool transgressive things that you can learn a lot about the person and what they choose to use and the culture and where it comes from. And that's just as much as it's also because it's taboo that there isn't a manual of style, that it really is very much of the people. And so for all those reasons, I don't know, I know I'm going on, but I have often had big discussions online where someone says, that's swearing is lazy. You should come up with, a better way to say that. It's like, you know what? I actually thought exactly what I wanted to say. And I wanted to have that shock value or transgressive value. And like, you're telling me that, I got to work on my vocabulary without being a jerk. I probably have 10 times the vocabulary of most people I know, not 2 or 3, but literally 10. And so when I make a word choice, it's pretty good. It's what I want to say. It's not that I'm just the motherfucker because I can't think of something else to say.
I was going to say that in the right place, it has the right effect, just like any word. But if you're just using it as the description for every single thing you say in every sentence you say, it's like, come on. And like you were saying with the swear words, they're very the things that are quaint. Like we joked about taking old Victorian swearing and putting it on t-shirts because it won't offend people nowadays. It changes.
Exactly. Isn't that true? Yes.
Or all the ones we've learned from Yiddish. We all know a few Yiddish ones that nobody gets that upset about, except maybe some Jewish people.
Exactly. And that's true. I'm pretty sure that's how like Hollywood writers. So boy, I love how our discussions spin around. We've seen a couple movies lately, one on Mank, that is, Mankiewicz, who was one of the authors, screenwriters that like Citizen Kane tapped him to do, Orson Welles tapped him to do Citizen Kane. For the time, he was fantastic. We just watched a documentary on Dalton Trumbo, not a documentary, more of a recreation, but that, when you have, all the Borscht Belt comics, there is a big Jewish influence in modern comedy, modern screenwriting, and so forth. And just that, if they wanted to throw a word in there that they could kind of like sneakily, get away with, they threw in schwanz. They threw in, the kinds of things you're saying. And to us, again, it's just kind of quaint, but a Jewish mom would go, wash your mouth out with soap. That's not right.
Billy Crystal loves to do that.
Exactly. So, Arend, the gentleman's name, like Gunther Amend is the name of the guy who did Maledicta. I just love that, and I might not have it exactly right, but I think I've talked about this before. it's just so cool to have little guys in my head that are going through the files, and while we're talking about something else, they like, sir, it's a blue letter. Here's the information you were looking for. And boo, woo, woo. Exactly. I've always had that, and it's. I know I've talked about this. It's kind of funny. I don't always remember. Now, hey, we're in like our 51st episode. We're almost a year, which is the coolest thing in the world. I've started to lose track of exactly what we talked about. So I'm sorry if I occasionally repeat myself. And I do hope that my stories are the same, so you don't think I'm like, well, there he's lying again, making it up as he goes along. It's I've always liked that there's like they have a phrase, the conversation, the ghost on the staircase, where it's like you're in a party and then you think of a line you could have said that would have been really good, but now it's too late. It would be out of context. And people often have that experience. Well, instead of my being that I think of it hours later in the car on the ride home, mine kind of like has a real short recirculation time, like 20 seconds or something like that. So sometimes while we're standing, enjoying a cocktail and talking, I'll blurt out something, but I can say, no, remember when we were talking about the guy that was the first ballooner? And now I remembered it was the Montgolfier brothers or something. And I always think it's kind of impressive that that kind of stuff is in there, and it might not have the exact thread that you could pull on right away, but that my mind has an ability to kind of in the background, in the subconscious, go, okay, you know this, and all you got to do is think of where'd you first read it, and think like sometimes I have not quite an eidetic memory, but I can even remember, okay, it was kind of like 2/3 of the page down, so I am using not only the meaning of the word, but the visual of where I first read it, and so it's kind of cool. When did I first hear it? Like we just talked about, when you first hear uvula, that it's like, where did that get stored that I don't have a visual to go to, but I do have some way of going back in time to the Saturday Night Live episode and go, I heard
because you've got those connections that trigger.
Yes.
And
exactly.
I think it's more, I think sometimes intelligence is more that not necessarily that your processor is running faster, it's that it's multi-threaded and can run multiple processes at once.
The power of parallel versus sequential, that can be exactly right. You know what I mean? So when they've done changes to computer coding over the course of time, or actually how a chip is built, the early Macintosh had a big change when they went from, and bear with me, here's nothing I got to think of, like, chip versus drip. I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of the acronym that it was, whether you're doing, you can make up for not doing parallel processing by doing sequential processing so incredibly fast that you don't lose anything by saying, if I can make this run 100 times as fast, I don't really need the parallelism as much. And parallelism has its own overhead and complexity to it. And that's what it is. It's RISC versus CISC. Isn't that cool how that works? It's reduced instruction set computing versus complex instruction set computing, and that you don't need to worry about memory management or popping things on and off the stack, and kind of how computers do things internally, that you just say, if you ask me something, I'll tell you so quickly that there won't have to have been any taking something and putting in the background while I work on this. And so it's kind of, I just read an article recently about how there's probably really a big mistake we've made when we talk about artificial intelligence, that there's often that correspondence between, let's make that AI work like your brain does because it's a big computer. Well, neither of those things is true. Your brain is not like a computer, and you can't make a computer with enough interconnections that it'd be anything like a brain. So we're kind of creating a whole new form when we get neural networking and deep learning type things, where we're teaching it how to do the associations that we think are kind of like synaptic, neuronic, and what a wrong crazy word, neurotic, connections, but that we're actually like, we're training an idiot savant to do this thing very, very quickly, image recognition or whatever else it might be. And that sometimes the goal is to get to G, to get to general intelligence, where the Jeopardy computer, right? Deep Blue Watson, like, it's really good at taking in a corpus of information and being able to get to what's the most probable thing that's associated with all that. But does it really understand that a pea pod is a pod for peas? Or does it, I know I'm being silly with my example, but there's something about Does it do the visualization that we do to see what a pea pod is and know that that's because there are peas in there that could become pea vines, pea plants,
Right.
and all that kind of stuff? Or is it just that it's really good at, I fed it a billion facts and it does a real quick, kind of like a sieve as to what word is most associated with the things that you're asking about. And I think it's pea pod. I think it's Mankiewicz. I think, you know what I mean? It's
Right.
that
Right.
it really is, doesn't have self-awareness, doesn't have will to get to, I know this.
Right.
And so I love these meta discussions because it really is illuminating. You know what I mean?
Well, with the computers, again, we have to define all of it right now, even though that Watson can learn. And I thought about this a while back when I go to like a used bookstore, and it's a very big used bookstore with thousands of books on the shelves. I'm not thinking in my head, I want this author, this title, this title. I'm thinking the type of thing I want within certain parameters and what looks good, and we can't define those for a computer. I can't say, computer, go find me the books I would like. It just doesn't work.
Absolutely. In fact, I love that. I have had very similar thoughts, and I've actually had this discussion that if you're a collector, you already have an idea of what do you have and what do you need. Everybody has a want list. But when I go to a bookstore or a record store or various other places that I have amassed my collections from, maybe early on when I went to a comic book convention, I had a want list and I would pull it out because you have to be very specific. I need Iron Man 58. Don't know how I missed it, but I am missing it. So you look in the boxes and you kind of go forward until you get to the slot that should be 58 and find it. After you have a lot of stuff, I have now gotten to the point where I kind of unfocus. When I went to a big bookstore, like you're saying, I don't think I go in at all targetedly looking for anything. Maybe there's still 2 or 3 things that have somehow managed to elude me. The Celebrated Cases of Ricochet, a huge book by Stan Line about an old comic strip. And one day I'll find it. It's one of my grails. But having said that, I'll go to I know I like science fiction. Let's go to the science fiction section. And then you'll kind of just look around A to Z and you'll let your mind just say, all right, you're now into the B's and who do you like? And is there a title that stands out? Is there a series? And you're like, oh, I didn't know that there was a new one out in that series. Or, yeah, I've been missing. I have 1 to 5, but not 2. And look, finally I get 2. But I don't think I'm consciously pulling out a list and looking for it. There's that opportunistic little course going to find search algorithm that's just kind of saying, hope I find some treasure. Let's go take a look and let things ping off of me, So, and I don't know, everybody's got that thing of, I'm looking for something new. Shiny. This cover looks cool. It's of the kind of cover that I like where it's sword and sorcery, so it looks like Conan fighting. It's science fiction, so it looks like spaceships. And whatever else it might be, you read the cover blurb, and I think we've laughed about this before. If they can grab me in 3 lines that it's intriguing, I'm like, I'll spend $7 on that. Sure. You know what I mean? A young man bound for adventure needs a faithful reptile companion. Sure, dragons we go. You know what I mean? It's
right.
So,
speaking of the mass multitudes of things interested in, you mentioned you've discovered kind of a great box of things.
Well, it's kind of, I hope you don't mind. We have regular, updates on the vaults. I have a lot of comic books and I've been going through cataloging them so that I can actually get to where I will get them pressed and graded and ready to sell. And it's nice. I really think that my retirement plan, this little part of it is going to work out. I have some things that are kind of cool and valuable. Well, probably mid-90s, I was making good money as a consultant, and I had that idea of I really should. How I store my comic books is usually standing spine up, down, and all tight, compressed, so that they're not going to get hurt. They're not going to get wavy because they're stacked on top of each other. I took a whole bunch of my what I thought at that time were my most valuable ones, like old Marvels from the 60s and stuff like that. And I had them all boarded and bagged and graded by a guy who worked at a comic book store who I liked and trusted, and both just trust in terms of nothing will disappear, but also trusted his judgment that he would be a good grader. And so kind of as opposed to a lot of things that I still have in what the comic book people call raw condition, it's just out. You know what I mean? It might be nice and tightly stored and everything like that, but I haven't boarded it. Well, for hundreds of them, I did that. And Those boxes are in my collection along with all the other boxes. And so it's interesting because that's the first time that I actually took things out of perfect A to Z order. You know what I mean? And that this set of things are in their own boxes. So I guess if I was like, that's a concentration of my fortune. You know what I mean? Well, I just found one of those boxes, and it's got wonderful old Avengers and wonderful old Strange Tales and Tales to Astonish and Tales of Suspense. And it's kind of funny. Most people don't think of those titles if they know anything about comic books, but Strange Tales is where Doctor Strange started, where the Human Torch was for once his own series, where Nick Fury, Agent of Shield came into being, where Adam Warlock got his early series that now is going to become him, and he's going to figure into Guardians of the Galaxy 3. So it's kind of cool to say, yeah, I had this little series of Black Widow at one point, and nobody really, really cared about Black Widow until Scarlett Johansson in the Avengers made her iconic. And Tales of Suspense was Captain America and Iron Man, and Tales to Astonish was Ant-Man, Giant Man, Hulk, Submariner. So they went on to have their own cool series and become like iconic characters within the Marvel Universe. And these are really hard to find in good condition because back then it was kids reading comic books and then kind of, trading them back and forth and using them, I don't know, for a placemat when they ate their cereal or whatever else it might be. So the fact that I have a whole bunch of stuff in good condition, and if anything, it's kind of funny. I often talk about it as if it's mercenary, but it's just so nice to see my old friends. You know what I mean? Like I can remember, oh my God, that's the first Melter. That's, if you're going to have an Iron Man, what would be the villains that would figure against Iron Man? And so there's going to be maybe another guy in a suit of armor, like Titanium Man or Crimson Dynamo. There will be somebody with a melting device that will be able to, wreck his iron. And so I just like that wonderful, again, kind of a brain thing, that transport back to, I remember reading that. Right. I remember finding that on the newsstand. And I have also, there's multiple copies of some of these. And my loved red heavily copy is just torn up. It's in good condition at best. But at one point that I filled in my collection when you can still buy comic books for reasonable money at comic book conventions. And so I have just like lots of cool stuff. And I think I mentioned before, at one point, I did it then, not only to preserve it for the future, because I really was expanding my consulting practice and I needed money. I was going to be working on Gambit, my artificial intelligence trading systems. Well, I sold old Fantastic Four and old Spiderman for very good money at the time. But as you might imagine, with the advent of 25 years and the advent of movies, boy, did I give away some good stuff. Not give away. Sold to a good friend. They went to a good home. And yet, when you've held on to other things and you're like, wow, I have Avengers #6. And that's the first appearance of the Masters of Evil and Zemo. And then you put it into the system and you see what it's worth. It's like, that's sweet. And that's like, oh, but I 200 issues at least of things that are probably
10 cents,
$1,000 each that were 12 cents at the time. So it's just very weird to say could have been even better. And yet, what can I say? I'm happy that I have what I have. You know what I mean?
And it's speculation. I mean, Marvel went bankrupt in the 90s, so they could have completely died and nobody would have cared now.
There are so many comics, like when I go through, going through the system, I'm finding out that like 20% of my comic books have value. I have many, but out of my 40,000, I'm going to have like 8,000. What am I going to do with the other 32,000? We talked about this a little last time. Go to eBay, sell them to friends. There's a lot of people that really care about certain things that were an artist's or writer's early work with, not even the biggies like Image or Dark Horse, but they did things for Comico. They did things for places that have gone defunct. And Whitman. There were some like great, Matt, bear with me, who did Grendel? Matt, it'll come to me. There's, it's cool to see their early work in various different places and that they then went on to big things. Or in some cases, it's very frustrating to say, wow, Kevin Van Hook did fantastic stories, fantastic artwork. And then I got a feeling that his independent comic didn't sell enough issues. And he kind of said, guess I'll go back to advertising. Guess I'll be, I don't know, I'll write books. I've never seen Kevin Van Hook's byline on anything else. So maybe he went back to being a roofer. Maybe he went back to, you know what I mean? That he's just the standard guy in the world. And there's any number of stand-up comics or singer-songwriters that are like that they kind of gave it a go. It didn't work out, and they have a perfect first album, but then they're out in the world as a different person, if you will.
Right.
So I have all kinds of stuff that's the early work of people that it was as good as anything else that Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image was putting out. But when you sell 2,000 copies of an independent, not everything gets to be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles,
Right.
where it just rides the lightning, that it captures this incredible, silly interest, and that you get to where like, hey, I think I'll make the heavy metal movie because I have so much money that I can do pretty much anything that I want. I can marry Julie Strain. You know what I mean? It's
Right. Now, have you gone back lately and read too many of the like old 60s or 70s comics, or you just remember them and you have them?
See, that's what it is. I am aware of the stereotype of, anybody who's trying to clean out their attic that's also a reader, you'll never get done.
Right.
Because you go up there and you're like, wow, this is great. And then you kind of fall back into it. You immerse yourself. I have so much tried to not do that. I've brought certain things home that I wanted to recreate that experience of reading The Dark Knight by Frank Miller or Watchmen by Moore and Gibbons. What are my absolute favorites? Sin City by Frank Miller. There's some things that have held up very well, and they're periodic and episodic enough that it isn't like, okay, I'm going to do this and then I'm not going to do something else. I can fit them in, handling them gingerly while I'm going to bed at night or something like that. My last half hour of reading or something like that. Right. Some things I don't even know why I thought, how about Johnny Nemo? Like a really silly side. Right. I think he was like a British import, as a matter of fact. He might have been in Warrior magazine or one of the British imports, but they were Peter Milligan's early work, if I remember correctly, who went on to do lots of other good comics for DC. And they have this right sense of humor, this right, like, dissolute atmosphere, you know what I mean? That they're mysteries, but he's really a bastard of a character and stuff. And so some of those were just like maybe a little bit of recapturing. I remember laughing my ass off in college reading these. I think I'll recapture that. And they really are still funny and well done and stuff like that. So, but not in the storage lockers, not in the vaults, because I don't want to break my rhythm of,
right.
I'm typing into the computer, I'm clicking on this. I really have resisted that.
Well, I've been actually going back and rereading old Spider-Man. I mean, like the early Amazings and stuff. And honestly, at some point, I get like, okay, these stories are like all the same. They're drudgery almost reading. I remember it fondly, but nowadays it's like I could be reading much better things or newer Spider-Man that have better storylines. So really, I've flipped through some of them, looked at some of the art, and get an idea, because like you got the Smasher, you've got Gibbon, you've got Kangaroo, you got all these like old villains that appeared once or twice, and it's like the same story. It's the template. So they're remembered fondly, but they don't interest me for reading as much nowadays.
Exactly. One of the compliments that people often give to things is that they were ahead of their time. And so sometimes when I read things, it's like, wow, they really did kind of predict the future. One of the biggest compliments I can give is they're ahead of their time even for now. Like when you watch the Prisoner series with Patrick McGowan, they are absolutely still pertinent to here's what governments do with people that are too dangerous to be let out in public, but they were good agents, they were good citizens, so you don't want to just kill them. You have to kind of give them a retirement, but what are they going to do as an agent? Seek to escape. They need to exfil. You know what I mean? Like, and so there's, and just how they treat it, the mind warping and the nothing is as it seems. You can't trust anybody. That's very much the paranoia that we see nowadays, where there's so much disinformation and there's so much that you can't, who you choose to trust has incredible ramifications on your life. And if you choose badly, boy, can it like screw you up. So, Spider-Man, not so much, but there's a great run of Fantastic Four from like, let's say 30 to 50, where in 2 years, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee introduced the Frightful Four, the Inhumans, Galactus, Silver Surfer, Black Panther. They like just every single issue was more. It's a family saga. It's a science fiction saga. It was the Negative Zone with Blastar, and I think Annihilus might have come later. It's just the coolest thing to say. Every single issue, they were laying the groundwork for fantastic things to come. Exactly. Yeah. And those ideas were good enough that, like you said, nowadays they do have wonderful, more intricate plots. And as I've mentioned, one of the things I love reading is where someone, you can tell they've read all of what I have and they have a new take on it. So I've been reading the Secret War series by Jonathan Hickman, not the relatively silly stuff with the Beyonder from 30 years ago now or something like that. But this is so smartly done about the collapse of the Marvel multiverse and who gets saved. And it's Doctor Doom creates Battle World, right. This last refuge where everything is like, these are the people that were saved. And unfortunately, because it's Doctor Doom, well, he's God. He's the megalomaniac that wants everything to run, and it really does run pretty well. He's got things segregated so that cultures that would clash each have their own little segment of things, and he lets them fight a little bit because it's in their nature to have conflict. And it's actually like, wow, I kind of can't fault Doom for if he was gonna take the world, kind of like Stand on Zanzibar. You take the whole world, and if you just stack people together, a whole world of billions of people would fit on Zanzibar. So he found a way to do that. How brilliant. And yet, there's people that want freedom. There's people that want to not be told how it always has been, but how did this come to be? And so all those seekers and all those dissidents and all those heroes, they find a way to wreck it up. But all the time he's saying, this is what we have. If we wreck this, it might be that we cease to exist. The human species, this whole universe, this part of the last shred of our universe.
It's very sci-fi.
It is. It's very, Hickman really has a great feel for all different kinds of characters and how they would have continual conflicts or how they'd become allies. So Doctor Strange, and it's kind of funny, I think the series is 5 years old now, so I've only just recently read it via Hoopla. He's the sheriff. He's the guy that works with Doctor Doom to like keep this multiverse in order because he made the deal with the devil of, we have to survive somehow. It's worth having some shred of humanity, some shred of that whole multiverse left. And yet you thought he was a good guy. You thought he would have fought Doom to the end. And so it's very cool to have that new perspective on characters. And at the end, they find a way to like re-blossom that universe so that we exist again, if you will. But if people have memories of the compromises they had to make, the dastardly deeds that they were willing to do, they now have to live with that. You know what I mean? That there's alliances that are torn apart. And very smartly, the Illuminatus was a very cool concept that came together where they got like the biggest brains and powerful people in the Marvel Universe, and they were secretly trying to keep us stable in the background. Well, when people find out about that, they actually, like, we don't want anybody ruling over us, even benevolently. Well, they then actually mind wiped a couple people, if I remember correctly, Captain America.
Yeah.
And so it's like, wow, they really made moral compromises in order to keep order, to keep survival going and stuff. And it talks to all those cool issues. Wow.
And I mean, you could have a lot of discussions on Secret Wars, especially with what Tony did to
and Civil War. Exactly. That was very much so. That's right. You know, right. Do you want qualifications for being a superhero, or you want it to be vigilante justice? And there's really good guys and really bad guys kind of on both of those side of that issue. It was gut-wrenchingly good when you were first reading it and going, they're really going to have a falling out. They really are going to be like allies for 60 years, and they're not going to get past this.
That was a good series.
Wow, it really was.
The Secret Wars with Battle World leads to, speaking of Spider-Man, one of my favorite Spider-Man comics, the Renew Your Vows, and where Peter is hiding out, essentially. And Venom goes after him. That first Renew Your Vows is one of my all-time favorites, just because Spider-Man loses it when Venom goes after his daughter, but he's still holding back because he doesn't want to hurt other people. If you haven't read it, read it. It's well worth it.
I haven't. And it's kind of funny. Hardly ever do I have to say that. But as I think I mentioned, I stopped buying comic books more than 10 years ago. So there's all kinds of, in order to be a good citizen, pay off my house, that kind of stuff. And yet I know that there have been great stories like that. I need to go look for that specifically
I
because
love that
I'm,
one.
yeah, that's, in fact, I've just recently reread the series where Mephisto makes him and Mary Jane break up.
Oh,
And it's, oh
one
my
more day.
God. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
horribly, gut wrenchingly like
Yes.
they have to do it. They have to save Aunt May. But still, anyway.
Yeah,
So,
that's probably another one of those. If you don't like comics, you haven't read this. But again, like we said with the Marvel trailer, it really doesn't have the same impact if all you've ever read is that.
that's
You really
exactly
have
right.
to
You
have
have to have the buildup
lived
of
it.
what they went through to
Yeah.
get to be together and the sacrifices and the joys that they've experienced. And then, and it's kind of funny, from what I understand, that wasn't so much that an author came up with that and said, let's do this. It was kind of the editor in chief and the money guys saying,
That's
Spider-Man doesn't sell as well when he's married. We need to have him be more freewheeling, more witty, more not weighed down by the concerns of
right.
family. And so, who was it? Like Quesada, maybe? I'm trying to think who
I
the
think
editor in
so.
chief was at the time, right? And so it's like,
Yeah.
that's a horrible way to think of it, is that the real world really intruded. I mean, the fact that it was Straczynski, right? Michael Straczynski, J. Michael, who I really like his
Oh,
work on Rising Stars and other things, and
X-Wing.
Battlestar Galactica. He just done so much good stuff. So he took on this thing of, if we're going to have to do it, I'll still make it a good story.
And
You know
it
what I mean?
was.
The bullpen must have been divided about, really, if there's anybody in the Marvel universe that should be happy, it should be Peter Parker, and you're going to screw
Never.
him over.
Never.
And yet that's the
That's what I read last night. I was going back to the old ones. I read
yeah.
Amazing number 121, which I've read before.
Oh, the
And
death of
and
Gwen. Oh,
and talking of
exactly.
those old ones, this one still holds up, I think. It's still a good, well-written story. And they did it so well, they didn't, it opens with, well, we're not going to reveal the title yet. And, and then you read it and you're
Right.
like, and it's weird looking at it now, because if you only know Spider-Man from like even the 80s, 90s, 2000s, the movies, it's always Mary Jane, you know. But before that, the first 120 issues, it was Gwen Stacy, and
Right.
her dad died, but knew who Peter was, and that was like Peter's like, oh my God, maybe I can have a life, and he's got Gwen, and then Goblin goes crazy, and it's not
Exactly.
even that Goblin kills her, and it's not even that she dies because it's just physics. And he did everything he could to save her, and he still didn't have enough. That's what he kicks himself for the next 3 decades.
Exactly that. That's a great way to put it. You know what I mean? They found a way to kill him that still kill her, that left him with horrible guilt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He was trying to save her. He thought he had saved her, and then terminal velocity, not in
Yep.
terms of hitting, but in snapping.
And
Anyway,
that
if
little
I remember
snap,
right, that little snap. I was just going
yeah,
to say that. You know that the writer was like, I'm going to need this to be really subtle and
subtle.
sad.
Yep.
Oh my God. It really was a shock at the time that it came out. That's one of those things
Yeah.
that you kind of like want to say to your non-comic book reading stories. Okay, you don't know anything about this. You don't have the first 120 issues, and yet this is how good comic books can be.
Yeah.
This is
Which
really
in some ways makes One More Day even more devastating, because it's the second time he's had that happen.
that he's had, exactly, and somehow he keeps wisecracking, you know what I mean? The fact, and one of the things in Secret Wars was him now being kind of mentor for Miles Morales, who they've introduced as the next Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And now there's a whole Spider-Verse, as you know, and that's another thing. I've seen collections of those that I haven't gone into because I kind of want to read it all from the start correctly together, but no one library has all of that. So I'm going to have to see, can I find it all on Hoopla? Can I get it through Comixology? I know I have a couple of subscriptions, and it's kind of funny, we have everything. Comixology has a lot of different stuff, but I've also read things like This Looks Good. And it's like, well, I was glad that was free. Like I read Lock and Key, and I'm an author that I usually like, and
Joe
pretty
Hill.
good artwork and stuff like that, Joe Hill, and it wasn't like horrifying enough for me. I guess it was just okay, and I can see that he's laid the groundwork. So maybe I'm giving it short shrift. He's laid the groundwork for this various concept of a house, kind of a house of mystery, house of secrets, where doors open to various different places, and maybe it will get more horrific, or I'll care about the characters more and stuff like that. But this first, I don't know, 6 issues, I guess, it was like, okay, that was good. as compared to reading Secret Wars, which was, this is so well done.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the cool things that Hickman does is he has like the intro pages, the little charts of how the universe hangs together, who's in this story.
Yes.
And like you can tell that that's almost like his working thing. He's got that on his computer somewhere. And he says, if I'm going to make this work, I have to account for everything. If there's a big plot hole that says, well, if it wasn't, and like the molecule man that was involved in all of this, are there other forces? You've had any number of cosmic things in Marvel over the course of the years where why didn't Eternity, Infinity, Galactus, the Celestials, why didn't any of those show up? And I'm sorry if I'm mixing up between Marvel and DC, but you know what I mean. It's there's cosmic forces.
Well,
it's
isn't
the
General
Eternals.
Zod in Battle World in the neutral zone, right? Now, going back for a second, you mentioned Lock and Key, and obviously I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and I love Joe Hill. I think he's done some amazing
his son, right?
stuff.
Exactly. I mean, that's okay.
Yeah, very much. I think he's a little more hit or miss than his father, but he also does more things like comic books and stuff. So
exactly.
So I watched the Netflix series of Lock and Key. And we enjoyed it. I thought it was well done. It was fun. I wouldn't say, oh, dear God, I've got to own this in gold. I did enjoy it.
I wanted to make a point of reading before I watched it because I knew it was out there as watchable. And you know what I mean? I wanted to do that. I wanted to read first. So, okay.
Curious because I read the comics afterwards, opposite order.
Interesting.
And I said, wow, this seems more weird. And I was like, this isn't quite as interesting. So it'll be interesting if you watch the show and then we compare. Did I not enjoy the comics because I liked the TV show, or was the comics just ho hum? And you said it was just kind of ho hum by itself. So I think my thing is, and I've talked to so many people about these things. I think the shows on Netflix, the streaming services, are starting to really get it right as far as how to tell a really good series show story.
I agree. And it's not only about cliffhanger endings. It's about giving each character in an ensemble cast their own arc. It's about that there really are surprises, but they make sense from what you've known until now, instead of being just like, where did that come from? You can't have Deus ex machina continually resolve a plot. You have to have it be that, that he laid the clues. I just didn't process it. You know what I mean? I didn't get to that point. So you're right. They're getting very skilled at that.
And being able to adjust the story. It's the same basic idea in both, but there's a lot of differences. And the comic is, I think, darker in a lot of ways than the TV show. So is that what made the TV show better, or did they focus on the characters they needed for the story? There's a lot of, you could probably do
scope. If anything, I do like, we've kind of laughed about this. It's very nice. One of the reasons that I don't always read, I'm not always aware that this was based on a comic book series until I'm like looking at the credits and going, so I just watched Jupiter's Legacy, and it's a Netflix series. It's really good. It has great generational aspects of superheroing. You know what I mean? If you're not only comic books have now been around since, let's say 1933. So we're talking about 90 years. And of course you'd have, what if superheroes had kids? What if there was a handing off of the costume to another person and they didn't have exactly the same motivation or morality or whatever else it might be? What if that magic item that imbued somebody gets found by somebody else that isn't as good or bad a person? So all of that's a lot of what figures into Jupiter's Legacy. And, I really like Mark Millar. He wrote Wanted. He wrote a couple other series that I've really liked, but he also doesn't seem to be doing a lot of current comic book work. At least I didn't think so. I thought he had kind of gone Hollywood and was working on series and big scripts and stuff like that. So now I want to go back and reread Jupiter's Legacy, just like I watched Umbrella. I read maybe like the first 2 issues of Umbrella Academy and then stopped. And then now it's like 2 or 3 series worth of Umbrella Academy. And so I kind of compare and contrast. And I really like where by the 3rd issue, they're off book. I love where instead of being, okay, I know what's going to happen, I'll just watch it played out skillfully. No, it's kind of like, well, wait, that guy doesn't die. Like we've talked about The Walking Dead. He died early or he died late. Why is he still around? It's kind of cool to say, and especially when the show writer, the screenwriter is the original author, when he says, I kind of thought about it. Now that we're 6-8 years in, I would have done this differently. I would have
Yeah,
taken it in
I
a
love
different
that.
direction. Yeah, and I love that they actually have a chance to. Um, Way long ago, David Gerald was one of the first people that I knew in the world of science fiction that actually revisited a book and rewrote it, kind of. He didn't like the way he had done it. It wasn't skillful enough. The ending wasn't what he wanted. A big thing, the ending wasn't what he wanted. And so when you see, I kind of thought that was, why don't you write another book? Why don't you leave that one alone, frozen in amber? But then now that I'm seeing that they're regularly doing that, it's actually very cool that people have that sense of their own work as being something else to read and digest, and then maybe in 10, 20, 30 years say, well, that was young me, and now I'm older and I'd like to do it differently. And where it was, maybe I will. There's been, what do they call them? Reimaginings, that they do
Yeah,
leave the original one alone, but then they kind of retell the story. And it's kind of cool to say, well, what does age do to you? Does it make you more noble, more bitter, more playful, more, just this plot is bigger because you have a bigger view of the world now? What do you think about love? If you had a good or bad time in love, it'll come out in
right.
how you're talking between the characters. So I love that, I guess, that there's a body of work that isn't only frozen in stone. You know what I mean?
It's much more transitive nowadays.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and I'm glad you said that about Jupiter's Legacy, because I was looking at the trailer. I was looking at it, I'm like, that looks pretty good. I mean, it's not
Okay.
an unknown story. That type of thing has been told with kids and the next generation that forever, but
Right.
it looked really good. And I've seen mixed comments about it all over. People writing articles that like, yeah, it was ho hum, but I'm glad you said, that you
I
liked it.
really One of the things he does very well is, this is seemingly a common thing now, is it isn't just a linear story. He actually
Right,
starts off with what's going on now, and then he goes back and gives you some background,
right,
some history, and then jumps, maybe not, don't know that they jump forward, but you know what I mean? They show things almost Rashomon from different characters' perspectives, and that, well, that's not really what happened then. This
right.
really is an unreliable narrator, or at least there's more to the story than you thought. And so I thought that was actually, sometimes it's I don't even know, pedantic to explain something that you weren't skilled enough to have stand by itself. But sometimes it really is shocking to say that really wasn't what was going on.
That's
You know what
that's
I
the
mean?
Netflix formula. That's what they've been doing with all of
Interesting.
it. And I noticed it
Okay.
on The Haunting of Hill Manor first. That
Huh.
if you watch that one, it's masterfully done with showing you just a little bit and you're like, well, what's that? And they don't answer it. And then they do a thing later where it's like, oh my God, that's what that is. So it's almost like a mystery, which by the way, I just watched Knives Out. Have you watched that?
Oh, I love it.
Oh my
Exactly. That
God,
that
that
was,
was
yeah.
such a great movie. Yeah, that was really well done.
This is very funny. That was, Colleen and I went out on a New Year's Eve, and we were like, so we're going to go, like, our favorite thing. We're going to go to the casino buffet, and then we were going to see a band, like a prog rock band, and somehow they couldn't do it that night. So well, let's go to a movie. There's theaters, and I knew nothing about it except it looked to be the kind of thing, ensemble cast, a lot
Yeah.
of people that I like that are skilled. And then as we were watching it, we were like, I'm so glad that we
Yeah,
stumbled onto
it
this,
was
that this
very
wasn't.
well done.
Exactly. When I first saw Die Hard, it was because the movie I really wanted to see was sold out. And it's like, well, let's go try it out. Bruce Willis is kind of like, I know him from Moonlighting, and he's kind of funny, but then he was so great as an
Yeah,
action hero in a way that I never expected to, like, respect him, if you will.
right, right.
And one of those things, we're walking out of the movie in the lobby going, are you here to see Die Hard? You're going to love it. You know what I mean? If you're going to see another movie, trust me, just go to Die Hard instead. We were like instant converts. We were like,
Right. Yep, yep. And so I think that's the formula Netflix has hit upon, because just about all
okay,
their series do that now, and they're figuring it out very well. And I think
interesting.
that's a difference between some of the comics and some of the series, because like Umbrella Academy, I like the show. It's a fun show, and I think mostly it was because of the characters. All those characters were really strongly unique. In the
Yes.
comic book, not that they didn't do it well or good or anything. I don't think the characters were as strong in the comic, in the trade that I
That's a great
read.
way to put it, that it was the plot that was going on instead of the character. That's
Exactly.
okay. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So it's two different mediums, and I think they get really well what they do well in that medium. Not that they couldn't have brought the characters out more, but I think Netflix was able to define those characters really well for the show. And it actually helped me enjoy the comic more. I think if I would have picked up the comic, I might have gotten bored and put it down and maybe picked it back up, that type of thing. But because of the show, in this case, I was like, oh, I like this. It's like giving me more.
Yeah. One thing I did do with Jupiter's Legacy was I kind of binged it. I usually give myself like one a day because I like to say, well, what's going on? And let my mind kind of process and that kind of stuff. But there were just enough things going on, like, oh, I got to know more. And so I think it's probably like 9 episodes, and I think it didn't take 9 days. It probably took like 3 or 4. So, you know what I mean?
That's one of the factors that Netflix looks at. They look at who starts it, and do they finish the first episode and go right to the second, or do they go to the second after a day, or do they not go to the second until 6 months from now, or do they watch 3 or 4 episodes then stop? And are 3 million people stopping after episode 3? Is that they look at that?
And they look for that so they can tune their future things, because just that they don't put out Nielsen ratings like television stations used to and stuff like that. But they have to care about, well, we sunk $10 million into this thing. Did it get the watchability that's going to have people saying, sure, I'm going to renew my Netflix subscription?
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's I really do like the fact, now that there are so many things coming out, that Netflix is still seemingly, let's find good creators and give them what they want. You know what I mean?
From all over
the resources
the world.
they need. Exactly. So I'm always looking forward to whatever next. Garth Ennis, Warren Ellis, Mark Millar. There are certain authors that I really come to trust. And it's kind of funny also, Colleen and I have been working our way through various different movie series by all the Hitchcocks, all the Woody Allens, all the Coen brothers, etc. And we're kind of getting to, okay, we've watched a lot of the directors that we really like, and some of the things like David Mamet, some of them aren't even available. So we kind of hit a holding pattern. And instead of seeking out, I don't think they're lesser directors, but they just haven't piqued our interest necessarily. We've been saying, well, there's other ways to do this. We've already watched all the AFI Top 100. How about just what actors do we really like, and seek out their movies? So, for instance, I think Willem Dafoe, when he's on screen, I can't take my eyes off of him. He's so good at inhabiting various different characters in a dangerous way, in a funny way, you know what I mean? And he's played all different kinds of stuff. And so we just recently watched a biopic of him playing Vincent van Gogh, which is actually like Vincent van Gogh. You know what I mean? The way they said it in the movie was very French, and the way that I should learn how to say. And actually, though he's Holland, he's a Nederlander. He lived in France for most of his life, so that's why they say it that way. And it just, I'm now inspired to be like, there's all kinds of Willem Dafoe that I don't know that I've actively sought him out. And like The Lighthouse, I think him and Robert Pattinson.
I want to see that. Yeah, Pattinson. Yeah.
So and so it's another, I love when you get a reasonable idea. Like when we first tried the British baking show, it was like, I don't know, we're both kind of brain dead. Let's just watch something silly. And then it proved to be much more addictive than we ever expected it to be. Well, I like getting that little thing of, let's go to the state capitals. Let's watch Willem Dafoe. You know what I mean? You get an idea that then it's like, well, now this has legs. There's got to be 50 Willem Dafoe movies. And it's not only him playing the Green Goblin in Spider-Man 2. So all the way back, a first movie I remember him from was, I think, called Streets of Fire. It was like an 80s action pick where Michael Paré is the hero that comes home to rescue Diane Lane, his sister, from the clutches of a bad street gang. Willem Dafoe plays the leader of that game called Raven. And he's so evil. He's the guy that when he does this little thing and puts his head down and he gives you the evil eyes, he really looks satanic, And at one point, like a whole bunch of stuff is blowing up in the street, and he comes walking out of the flames going something like, well, finally I met someone who likes to play as rough as I do. And the climax of the movie is a sledgehammer fight.
Wow.
Not like punching, sledgehammers. So I think it's Walter Hill. He did a whole bunch. He did The Warriors, a whole bunch of other over-the-top, kind of like almost comic booky type movies. But that was my first impression of Willem Dafoe, and I really thought, I want to see this guy in everything he ever makes from the first movie on. I just like I said, you can't take your eyes off of him. There's certain actors that are like that. They're just so crafty.
There's some, like we just watched No Remorse, Tom Clancy's No Remorse with Michael B. Jordan, because, Michael B. Jordan's in it. And it was good. I enjoyed it, had a good time. A lot of action. It's not one of those. It's a Tom Clancy book, so it's very military and fighting
Yes.
soldiers. And I don't
Loving
usually enjoy.
descriptions of weaponry, you know what I mean? He goes into much
Yes,
detail about exactly
yeah,
what bore the rifle is. And
right. Except for Red October, I've not watched a lot of Tom Clancy. I read the book too,
okay,
which is a great book, but it was good. It was a good action one. And then we watched Knives Out. It's like we watched those back to back, and I thought Knives Out was great.
very cool.
But call back a second ago to something we were talking about earlier. You said you just watched a biopic, and that's funny because I always heard it biopic. And Colin and I have gone back and forth with that word particularly because he's like, no, it's biopic. I'm like, I swear to God, I've always heard it biopic, but I've heard it both ways now. So that's another one of those words
Yeah.
to add
See,
to the
that's
list.
the reason that I would say it that way is because to me it's a portmanteau word, and it's of
Yeah,
course biography and picture.
picture.
So I
Yeah.
tend to not transform the sound of them. And in fact, this is, oh my God, we're going to talk about the biggest controversy of all of computing. You know, it's
Oh,
pronounced
no.
GIF. It's graphic with a hard G. It's not GIF, like as
Right.
if it's giraffic. And so, and this is that again, you know how my mind makes connections. I remember, so the guy who created the format, he says it's pronounced GIF. You're
Yeah.
wrong, creator
Right?
of the format.
Yes.
You can't just decide to make the English language different than how it works because
Well,
you
actually,
like
that
saying
is how the
GIF like
English
peanut
language
butter.
works.
To go back to how we started
all,
talking.
all
But
my
it's
kids,
GIF, gosh darn
all
it.
my
It's,
kids say give, and I
yes,
agree. But I will always throw back at them. But the guy who created it says GIF, so you're wrong, and
exactly.
it drives them crazy. I will purposefully say GIF just to drive them all crazy. It's like,
Yes.
come on, guys! I grew up with GNU Linux, so I know how this works.
Right. You know, the first Dune movie, Frank Herbert was actually a consultant to it. One of the first times they actually brought the author on, not just saying, thanks for the book, go away. And they have things in there where they pronounce the
Freeman.
tribe Fremen. And it's like, no, it's Freeman. It's Freemen. What are
Yeah.
you doing? You must have heard it in your head like I did. No, apparently he didn't. He wouldn't have let that go. He was the guy.
It's
So,
funny you brought that up because I've been listening to the audiobook of
oh
Dune
man.
lately. And it's a lot. I mean, if you like the Ice and Fire from George Martin, if you like that stuff,
Okay.
you'll
Yes.
probably like Dune, even though it's sci-fi, not fantasy. You know, I'm realizing the connections there. And hey, watch my glasses. I like the book. I remember I thought it was okay, and listening to it
Yes,
again, I'm
I've
like,
read every one in the series. I really kept reading
including the
even
new ones
after.
with his.
Exactly. I've been seeking out because they are the ones that, like, and we talked about this before, when
Yeah.
those associates, the sons, you know, the
Right.
Brandon Sandersons, the Kevin J. Andersons, they know enough about and lovingly know about the series that they fill in. Here's where we first had space travel based on spice. Here's where we first had the zombie, you know, clone type. And I like them giving the backstory in a very convincing, fully fleshed out way. I think that's really a talent to be able to fill it in that it matches, but it really is good still on its own
And
as a
not
good
just be
standalone
a
tale.
derivative,
Yeah, a
clunky.
cash in.
Yeah,
Exactly. You know what I
exactly.
mean? The hack work, if you will.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I really have read, like, I don't know, even when Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, those are what people often call the Dune trilogy. But then it went
Right.
on with Chapter House and Heretics. And I was like, you know, there's still cool things here. I don't mind reading more about the sandworms. I don't mind reading, again, a generational saga where the Harkonnen and, you know, there's
Right.
real hatred, real, like, I'm willing to span the stars to get back at you. You know what I mean? Like, that's real evil. The Beast Raban. And anyway.
I can't wait for the new movie to come out. I wish it was a
I'm
series,
curious.
but I'll be interested in it. Hey, I wanted to make sure I hit on this for you. Here is the wonderful discovery of the week. You ready?
Let's do it. Okay.
Reese's peanut butter cups, no sugar.
The crack cocaine of
But it's no
snacking
sugar.
food.
So
no sugar.
diabetics
For all
can
of
eat
us, diabetics can have them without being, okay, I got to check.
Yeah. And guess what? Everybody in the house says it tastes just like regular Reese's peanut butter cups, including Frankie, who this is like the only junk food candy he will eat. And he tasted it and said, hey, this doesn't taste any different. So
Wow.
there you go. Discovery of the week.
You
They
know,
also have
that's
Hershey's
cool.
no sugar.
Interesting. So I love material science and chemistry, and the fact that I'm just totally speculating. So they found some kind of sugar that is a chimera. It's a transformed, different version of that it tastes sweet, but it doesn't get digested, so no calories. And
Right.
so it's so cool that they can actually take something as basic as a sugar molecule and say, what are all the variations on this that we can do? There's a whole web thing about protein folding, trying to get to how do we figure out diseases and stuff like that. But the fact that this chemistry thing said, we're not trying to cure cancer, we're trying to cure calories. And yet, what an impact that's going to have on the world.
Yeah.
And you hope that it's like, well, we thought it wasn't going to matter, but we found out that actually, if you have too many of these in your system, then they lock together like little puzzle pieces, and now you've got a swollen colon.
Now you're in trouble.
Exactly.
Okay, so I've actually looked this up a little bit. So my first take is, I think a large part of what makes this taste like the regular one is not the flavor, but the texture, because the peanut butter texture is just the exact same, and it's a unique feel of the peanut butter that's in these. So I think, it's the association your brain makes. It's like, oh, I can feel a Reese's peanut butter cup, so that's what I taste. So
absolutely.
I think that's what it does.
I love that. Food science itself is so much about that of course it's not only sugar, fat, salty, fat, bitter, etc. on your tongue. It's mouthfeel. It's umami. It's how does it chew? Does it cling to your teeth the same way that licorice does, or whatever else it might be? And so the fact that they can get down to the molecular level and say, the peanut butteriness of it, this is a 0.87, and we've got real close with a 0.85 that now most people cannot differentiate.
Right.
I love that. And I have no problems with the science behind like Beyond Meat and other places where they're saying, even based on plants, if we make it so that instead of being meat fiber, that it's got the right mouthfeel, the right taste, the right gush when you bite it, and the resistance when you bite through it, that the fiber has to be right. Because after you've had 1,000 burgers, you'll know if it's not a burger. Right. You know what I mean?
Right. And now the problem they got to work on next is getting all the salt out of it. Because Gina, I don't know if I said this, she just got detected with a heart problem. And she's got congestive heart failure, and the left side of her heart is weak and not working completely properly, because she'd been like getting dizzy at times, and we couldn't figure out why. And that's it,
Stephen. Okay,
so she's fine. I mean, they're saying it's not like you have a death sentence; you're going to die next.
Right, but sodium doesn't help that. Then you really have to be worried about blood pressure.
You'll kill yourself faster if you eat sodium. So suddenly she's a convert, which is funny story. When we got together, she thought it was weird when my mother would make things. She's like, why is she like rinsing the tuna off? Why? Because of the salt. She's like, well, that's stupid. That's weird. Now she's like, oh, now I get it. Let's do that. But anyway, so a lot of these things we get that are low in carbs, they compensate with lots of salt. And so we found ketchup that has no salt. We found ketchup that has no sugar, but we can't find one that has no sugar. I said, well, that's probably because it's just a tomato mashed up at that point.
Exactly.
But that's the next thing is, I mean, we use Accent, which is no salt alternative, but it just doesn't taste quite right yet. There's still
I think Accent is MSG, right? And so you have to be careful about that, because that's kind of a neuro activator. And so then you're like, so my younger brother actually has a sensitivity to aspartame and very certain things. And he's had to become very conscious of course, avoiding NutraSweet, aspartame, etc. But also when you see like on a bag of chips, if it says other spices, MSG is one of the things they often put in, because it does indeed excite your mouth in the same way you were saying. If you can't do without sugar, put a little salt in there, it'll still give you a little mouth excitation. Well, in his case, blinding headache. And so I, luckily, so far as I know, don't have any food allergies, or at least I haven't up until now. Colleen has been having occasional things where like, wow, things I used to be able to eat, now they're giving her like a little stomach bloat. And why in the world? I mean, I know that you get that from cruciferous vegetables and something like that, but you sure shouldn't get that from eggs, as basic a thing as eggs. And yet people's body chemistry changes as they get older. Their hormonal system changes, their biome changes. It's
And
tricky
here's the
business,
thing.
man.
I've been finding out, and I know people don't want to hear about us talking about our digestive system. That's,
Exactly.
not the best thing. But the whatever, I'll tell you about that too. But whatever's in these is
Mhm.
not as detrimental to my digestiveness as like some of the Russell Stover candies. Because I've gotten Russell Stover candies and I'm like, oh man, something's not right. And gurgle. And so
Right.
I've been paying attention to that. So the other thing I was looking up is I see, like, I don't drink a lot of pop. We drink a little bit, but you go and Dr. Pepper I like, but they have Diet Dr. Pepper and no sugar Dr. Pepper. What's the difference? I looked it up. So
Yes.
Diet Dr. Pepper has like a sweetener, an artificial sweetener. I think they use stevia for the most part now. And
Okay.
I like stevia a lot better than aspartame and saccharin and all the other crap they've used. So I
Okay.
can take that. Zero sugar is the exact same thing. It's their diet, but it has a secondary sugar-free alternative in it that sweetens it in a different way and makes it taste even closer to real sugar, so they say. So all
Okay.
you're getting different is an extra chemical in the zero sugar, but that's why these taste just like the regular ones, because it's zero sugar. They have two separate, competing almost, or that go
Okay.
together alternatives.
Right.
So
So a couple things about that. First is, I know you might have read some of these. There's reviews of gummy bears where they use a particular sugar substitute that apparently, if you binge gummy bears,
you're in
these things
trouble.
will kill you. They
Yes.
will, and of course not kill you. They'll have you give you terrible diarrhea. And
Yes.
like the descriptions of what happens, the people they wax very poetic about, oh my God, I had to run to the bathroom. And so just that, I'm trying to think it's not, erythromycin, because I know that's a drug, but it's something like starting with an E. It's an artificial sugar that starts with an E, and
Yeah,
apparently that's the culprit. And having said that, when I first read about like Coke Zero or Diet Coke, or now Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar versus Diet Dr. Pepper, I really didn't do enough research about the difference in sugars, because what I thought it was is a marketing ploy. There's a
right.
certain percentage, big, of guys who won't drink diet anything because it's not macho. I'm not a homo. I don't want to drink a
Right.
girl's drink. How
Right.
weird to have it be that the marketing has been so successful that, Diet Dr. Pepper drinkers go to the racetrack, and, and yet that's what I had read, was that they came up with those alternatives like Pepsi Free, and the code words for it's a diet drink, but you don't have to be seen as being a weenie for
Right.
drinking it. And like, how weird that guys are that self-conscious
Well,
about.
it's
I've never felt bad about ordering diet anything, and yet I
we've
guess
got
I'm don't care
we've got
about
a
the whole macho
whole
world.
we've got a whole episode we could probably do on the psychology of marketing and the
Exactly.
beliefs that people have that have changed over time too. I mean,
Yeah,
there's so
yeah.
many things you could talk about.
Light beer, I'm sure, was the biggest thing they
Yes.
had to do was not make it taste good. It was just to get people willing to order a light beer, a non-manly beer.
Right.
You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
And that's funny you say that too, because I don't drink a lot of beer. Every now and then I'll have one, and I like
Right.
Corona, but I like Corona Light better than Corona Extra. So
Okay.
it's just what tastes good.
That's actually whatever the word is, the key word, that it's like, I I'm well, this goes to the heart of it. People who are like Pepsi or Coke drinkers, and it's a religious decision. They
Oh
really will
yeah,
do one and not the other. And honestly, they're both fine to me. So
yeah,
is RC. So is any other brown bubbly water. They're all fine to me,
right.
except the
So
diet versus the regular. Now I really care about the diet, because now when I have
right,
regular soda, it's like I'm drinking sugar. I'm drinking syrup. You know
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? So
So tying this back to our earlier language discussion, that's
yes.
what they haven't come to realize. Don't make Corona Light. Figure out some Mexican word that they could put in there. So it's Corona Jajontes or something like that. It's like, oh yeah,
Exactly.
I'll drink that. And it's just the
Corona
light.
Olay.
Who
Exactly.
cares what it's called? A rose by any other name. It's that's what they need to do. And
That's
again,
right.
the marketing, then you give it this cool sounding Spanish Mexican name, and you do this
Right.
marketing of these guys in trucks mudding it and shooting feral pigs with slingshots and whatever else, and suddenly, yeah, I want to be like that. That's how the Marlboro cigarettes went about. They used the cowboy for like 2 years or something, and the sales of Marlboro did not change whatsoever. It was at one time Marlboro was considered a woman's cigarette, and it
Did
took
not know that. That's
2 years of
hilarious.
marketing before guys
To
looked at it.
transform that,
Yes,
exactly.
and now
That's
it's one of
funny.
the like biggest selling cigarettes in the world.
Yeah, yeah. You know, that it really, those marketing meetings, those rooms full of those people where they're talking about, so are we going to go with Corona, something else, and extend the brand? Are we going to come up with a whole Azteca? We're going to come up with a whole new name for beer. And
Right.
you know what I mean? All that thing of, can we build a new brand? And it must be intense, like crazy discussions, because you know that they have marketing data that says, well, you got a 37% chance of establishing a new brand, but it's really a full market. So what you might want to do is, well, there's no lime flavored beer. I mean, the proliferation, for instance, close to my heart, I run pretentious drinking every year. We try liqueurs and cordials, more than 100 at our wonderful Mensa Halloween party in Chicago. I've had any number of people suggest to me that we should get all different kinds of flavored whiskey, flavored vodka, flavored gin, and flavored rum. And it's like, that's not pretentious enough. It's not a pure thing, like where you've distilled, elderflowers down to their alcoholic essence. It's more, we took rum and we said, let's make it taste like cotton candy. Let's make it taste like shoe leather. And like some of them are, like, I could see how cinnamon is a real common thing, whatever the taste combinations. And yet, Fireball whiskey is not pretentious. It's a stunt to me. And even if it tastes great, even if I know that it would pour through, that everybody would like it and they'd get it, certain things I've allowed to sneak in because it comes in a cool skull-shaped bottle.
Right.
And just to have it on the table, I want to have this particular flavored tequila or whatever else it might be. But I'm not switching over to things that aren't the essence of something, that
Common
are
secular
instead,
drinking.
yeah, it's like they got a whole a rack of different flavors. You know how that is in a lab, that they've got from A to
Yeah.
Z, anise to Zima, and they're just going to say, how does this taste? How does this taste? And I just don't think that, like, De Kuipers is one of those off brands of liqueurs that makes I think they're really liqueurs, but they're like pumpkin spice liqueur. They're, you know what I mean? They're kind of like kid stuff. It's kind of like Boone's Farm wines, where it's like, this one is cranberry apple wine. Really? Really? Well, I'm kind of like, I don't know. I've been doing it for 25 years now. I'm holding the line to a certain extent, but the line is, there's so much now marketing of those various different things that a lot of the suggestions that I'll get is, can we try unicorn tears? You know what I mean? It's a gin that has glitter in it, and like, oh, don't make me do this. If it's so anyway, that's a
You ought to
little
have a
riff on.
section that's celebrity alcohols, because all these celebrities keep coming out with alcohols now.
That's really a good idea. I've always had sections where I make fun of, there's different nut flavors, and these are the romance ones. You know what I mean? This is the sexy drink. This is the,
Right.
and over here, all the flowers and the vegetables. It's kind of funny. I hope you don't mind me talking about this, because, and honestly, this could be a whole segment, because like I said, I got 25 years. Often, well, I'll try new things every single year. We often have like a dozen to 20 new things, as well as lots of the traditional stuff. And some things didn't finish pouring from last year, so they don't go bad. They're liqueurs, so they come back.
Right.
People will often come up to the table and say, "Hey, Al, how you doing? Give me one of your best and one of your worst." It's like, well, best might be a matter of your taste, but I know what this year's worst is, because everybody that's tried this has stomped the floor and screwed up their face. So we've had like a Kümmel. It's a caraway seed liqueur that was just so incredibly bad. And yet we've also had people who love bitter, who love certain tastes. So Chicago is renowned for Jeppson's Malort. It's really terrible, and it's a combination of terrible, and it actually comes with like a little booklet that hangs from the neck of the bottle that says, most people aren't manly enough to handle our assertive liqueur. You know what I mean? It really is meant to be the challenge of, oh yeah? And you belly up to the bar. Well, we've got someone, Laura, that really loves the bitters, and so she's become kind of our mistress of Malort. She's the one, is plying people with, if you want to try something you've never had before, here it is. And then when they try it, they're like, oh my God, what did you do? So I have that section now of the unicum and this one tastes like snake. This one tastes like, essence. We had one that was an artichoke liqueur it was like, I don't know. It really was as bad as you would imagine. And so sometimes I think that it isn't only a matter of trying new things. Jepson's Malort I have every year because I want people it's kind of pseudo famous. They've read about how bad it is and they kind of want to see for themselves because taste really is an incredibly personal thing. Well, after they've tried it, then they get that little badge of honor that says, I managed to keep it down. I managed to not, spit it out on the floor. It was so terrible. I clenched my jaw.
That's great.
Anyway.
Should have badges like in school.
I think that, I've tried virtually everything that I've ever served. Sometimes I didn't get to a bottle that turned out to be so popular that it was all gone before I got it, and then I got the next year. So I've tried, honestly, 300 going on 400 different liqueurs. It's a really interesting thing to be able to say because for most places, if you go to a bar, they've got half a dozen, 10 of those expensive bottles. And if you go around the country, there are certain things that are specific to certain cities and regions and stuff like that. But so I actually, on our wonderful vacations that Colleen and I take driving around, I will almost always say, well, as long as we're in North Dakota, I wonder if they have any liqueurs particular to North Dakota. And I brought back like a cloudberry liqueur and things anyway.
So what you're really doing is this is the state capital I drove drunk in. And this is the state capital. No, I know you don't.
And it's funny. Confession time for all of my Mensa friends. I kind of can't believe that I'm associated with this event. I'm almost a teetotaler. I really think that alcohol is not a great thing for Mensans who overdo it. If I'm trying to go to like a meeting with Smarties and they start tying it on Friday at 3:00 in the afternoon, by the time I'm playing a game with them at 9, 10 at night, they're not there. They're the shadow of themselves that is them plus alcohol. And luckily, happily, most Mensans seem to be kind of goofy, silly. They're not aggressive drunks. They might get a little slowed down or slurry, but they don't pass out. They don't vomit and stuff like that. Right. But they're still, what I'm going for is like me and my smart friends having these wonderful conversations that you and I do, where every reference leads to another reference, that kind of stuff. And then you see that they're giving you like the blank look because they've had one too many beers.
Not processing. Yeah.
Yeah. So the fact that Gary Krivko and I started it because we saw a slightly similar event in Milwaukee where they had like 4 bottles to sample, half a dozen maybe. And we were like, Chicago could do this in a big way. We really could. And so we started, and it just has grown ever since. And I actually like knowing a lot about it. And I guess I'm a binge drinker because that is the one time a year that I drink, and I might have a shot for New Year's Eve. And so that's also good in terms of for inventory control. When I used to hold on to them, now we keep them in Chicago, but I used to actually transport things back and forth. And it was safe in my house. I wasn't sneaking in to say, I really like that 43, that Corante y Tres. Everything just kind of sat. What I had to do to get ready to pour it was blow dust off the bottles.
Right.
If I had them in a box or out on the piano bench or something like that. So it's very funny to be associated with something. I belong to any number of like Smart Bar and various other Mensa groups that are all about the alcohols. And they talk about, hey, I had a flight of beers here and I tried these new alcohols. And I take notes because I want to be able to have them at pretentious drinking. But it doesn't inspire me to go to the bar and say, I want to try this new thing. I don't drink. I like me this way. I don't ever see, what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. I've maybe 3 times in my life have I gotten so drunk that I don't remember all of it. That's
Boy,
it.
All my drinking was pretty much college. And the first time that I ever, aided by my friends, got to where I woke up the next morning and I wasn't sure how I had gotten home. I didn't ever want to have that happen again. I didn't like the blackout. I didn't like the, because a lot of times they'll say, boy, you sure were a blast last night. You were talking and goofing. It's like, who was talking?
Right.
You know what I mean? It wasn't me. I don't remember that. It was unconscious me. It was stupid me.
One of my times was when I worked on the cruise ship. It's never smart to get drunk when you're on a ship out in the middle of the ocean and wake up in your bunk and go, how'd I get here?
How did I get here? You were on autopilot enough, which is kind of amazing that they're really, like we're saying about our little file clerks, there's also some guy that's going to say, I'll get you back. I'll get you to where you've peed and you haven't vomited, but I'm going to make
Hopefully.
sure you're turned on your side so you don't Bon Scott yourself. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, on that happy note,
Yes, there you go.
thank you for the wonderful find of sugar-free Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, and I will see what I
Give
can
it
do
a
to find
try.
them and give them a try. Exactly. Okay. All right. So, as always, take care, Stephen.
Have a good one, man. Talk
You
to
have been listening to the Relentless Geekery Podcast. Come back next week and join Alan and Stephen's conversation on geek topics of the week.